before the lunch break. I would like to introduce my co-panelists, starting from our special guest, Philippe Krohn. Philippe is a former colleague of ours. He was based in our Rome office, and now he's head of antitrust support at the ENI. Then we have Riccardo Molè and Alice Setari. Riccardo and Alice are colleagues of mine. They work in our Milan office, and they have acquired extensive experience, in particular in merger control cases. So I think they are very well suited to address today's topics. Alice and Riccardo will lead the discussion. They will trigger Philippe's reaction on a number of topics where the point of view of an in-house counsel will be extremely interesting. And before leaving the floor to them, I would like to make a few remarks. Starting from some figures. Figures are quite telling in this case. 90% of all mergers notified to the European Commission are unconditionally cleared. And many of them are mergers that do not raise any antitrust concern. No vertical, no horizontal concern at all. So these are mergers that do not warrant merger control scrutiny. Still, they are subject to a merger control filing obligation because of the way the European Union merger control thresholds are designed. They are based on mere turnover figures. So they may trigger, as they do actually, merger control filings even in situations where a merger control scrutiny is not necessary. So the European Commission has been struggling since the very beginning to find a way to deal very efficiently, very quickly with unproblematic merger control filings, so to focus its limited resources on cases that actually deserve merger control scrutiny. And so we have the simplified procedure, which has been introduced for the first time by the Commission in 2000. It has been strengthened in 2013 and apparently worked quite well. The evaluation staff working document released by the Commission quantifies the benefits which resulted from the simplified procedural path. For merger parties, the Commission says 46% fewer questions asked to the merging parties in the Form CO, and on average, merging parties saved 25 working days, considering both the pre-notification and the post-notification phase. So these are quite telling numbers. And for the Commission, I don't know how the Commission quantified this figure, but the Commission says that in the period between 2014 through 2020, thanks to the 2013 simplification package, they were able to save 5,500 working days. Still, the evaluation process run by the Commission showed that there was room for further improvements in the simplification procedure, suggesting in particular the opportunity to further extend the scope of unproblematic mergers deserving a simplified treatment. So we land to today's topic, the new package of simplification measures, which was adopted back in April 2023 by the Commission. We have three main documents: a new merger implementing regulation, a new notice on the simplified procedure, and a communication for the submission of documents providing for electronic submission by default. The key features of the new simplified procedure are described in this slide. We are still in a startup phase of implementation of the reform, so we are not in a position to observe, to measure the impact of the reform. But we must be optimistic. Certainly, the Commission is very optimistic about the benefits potentially stemming from this reform. The Commission says that approximately 10% of all cases that previously required a traditional, a normal procedure will be dealt with under the new simplified procedure. And as a result, at least 80% of all notified mergers, all other things being equal, will be handled, will be reviewed under the simplified procedure. And approximately 40% of horizontal overlaps and up to 19% of vertical relationships that previously were dealt with under the normal procedure will deserve a far less burdensome market investigation. I am a bit less optimistic, probably a bit more realistic, and I offer you three observations. The first one, first of all, the redrafting and expansion of the safeguards and exclusions, the flexibility clauses, not to mention the fact that the Commission retains a very large margin of discretion in assessing all those, will make the overall exercise of advising a client about the possibility to benefit from the simplified procedure a bit more complex and burdensome exercise for us external counsel, and for the in-house counsel. Secondly, the devil is in the detail, as in many other situations. By comparing the categories of cases deserving a simplified treatment, we can observe that sometimes the wording has been amended in a way that might restrain the applicability of the simplified procedure. More details to come on this, thanks to Alice, who will lead the discussion shortly. Finally, the reform is certainly a very much welcome and expected move. Still, I believe that the success of the new simplified procedure will be largely function of the ability and the willingness of the DG Comp to adopt in practice an attitude which is fully consistent with the very aim of the reform. And with this, I leave the floor to Alice and to the other co-panelists.
Thank you, Matteo. Good morning, everybody. I will be focusing on the notice of simplified procedure in the next 20-30 minutes with the help of my colleagues and Philippe. First thing, as many of you know, in this objective of achieving more simplification, both for parties and the Commission, there are two new categories of transactions that can qualify for simplified treatment. But before looking at these a little bit more in detail, I wanted to first look at the old categories, which are actually still there in the simplified notice, because some of these actually also deserve some attention. The old categories that are still there are certainly the extraterritorial JVs, so JVs with no or negligible activities in the European Economic Area, with the magic number of 100 million euros. So below this threshold, your transaction will qualify for simplified treatment. There's a small addition now in the new notice. It concerns the planned transfer of assets, which is interesting, in particular for greenfield joint ventures, I believe. So the old notice was focused on current turnover, expected turnover, current assets. So now there's this addition concerning the planned transfer of assets. The good news for parties is that you only need to consider this at the time of notification, because we already received questions from client for greenfield JVs where negotiations can be still ongoing at the time you're considering a notification, and governance aspects might not be clear yet at the time, or aspects considering what we will be actually conferring in the end to the JV. So at least it's circumscribed to the time of the notification, while for expected turnover, we know that the notice already frames this in the expected 3 years after notification. There's the usual transactions with no horizontal and non-horizontal overlaps. This hasn't changed. There's a change from joint to sole control, and that hasn't changed. In the next slide, it gets a little bit more complex because on the right side, we see the new notice, on the left side, the old notice. But before looking at what the new notice did, it's worth speaking about the other two categories that were already in the old notice. So these were transactions which, the horizontal overlap doesn't exceed the magic number of 20%, and the vertical relationship doesn't exceed the magic number of 30%. The other category that was already there in the notice concerned situations in which the horizontal overlap was not over 50% and the HHE increment was not over 150. So all this is still there in the notice, but the interesting thing that has been done is to allow parties to mix and match. So this is actually favorable for companies because there is more possibilities to meet the notice's criteria. So the important point is that you still always need to satisfy both horizontal and vertical criteria. That's a must. But then within these two big buckets, you have multiple criteria that you can meet, and these are alternative, not cumulative. So in the horizontal bucket, you always have the same numbers. So you always have to be below 20, and you always have to be below 50 with the HHE below 150. What has become more interesting is the vertical bucket. So we still have the magic number of 30%. That hasn't changed. But there is already a novelty concerning the vertical relationships because the Commission essentially gives parties an alternative to the downstream 30% market share. So upstream, you still always need to be below 30%, but in the alternative downstream, in the alternative to the 30% market share, you have the alternative of staying below the 30% purchasing share. And that's an interesting addition because it's also a way to look at how markets are intertwined independently from market shares. The other novelty is the second category, the new category, concerns situations in which both in the upstream and downstream market you are below 50%, an HHE delta increment of less than 150, and the smaller player among the parties is the same in the upstream and downstream market. So we have to unpackage this one a little bit because it's more complex. We always have the situation with the 50% market share in the HHE. We know this creates an inverse relationship, a proportion. If one party has, making the math, 20%, the other one can bring a maximum increment about 3.5. The more you increase, the less increment the other party can bring, and so forth. But the interesting addition is the last part of this criteria, because what does it mean when the notice is saying the smaller undertaking has to be the same in the upstream and downstream market? It's essentially saying that the only transactions that can meet this criteria are those where the bulk of the vertical integration was already there. So to make an example, and this is in the notice, if you have a party which in party A, upstream and downstream, has 45% market share, we already have a vertical relationship from the start. And so the other party can bring a small increment both upstream and downstream. This criteria is not meant to cover situations when party A has 45% downstream and party B has 45%. One has 45% upstream and the other one has 45% downstream, and then they each bring a small increment because, of course, here you have a vertical integration, a quite important one brought about by the transaction. So these are obviously transactions the Commission will want to look into a bit better. In the slide, it's a bit too small for you to read, but we felt it was interesting to notice this because there's been generally also a bit a change in approach in the new notice. And I believe the reason for this is that on the one hand, the Commission indeed has conceded more to parties. There are effectively more options to obtain simplified procedure. But I also think that they wanted to strike a balance and not depriving themselves of the possibility of actually calling in transactions when they even have a small doubt that they want to actually look into it. And we can note this, for example, from a footnote in the notice. So in the old notice, there was a very nice footnote which told parties it's enough if you fulfill any of the categories of the notice and you will be eligible for simplified treatment. And it was kind of nice because that gave you a sort of a safe harbor. In the new notice, we have a new footnote that says exactly quite the opposite. It says even if you qualify for any of the categories of the notice, does not automatically mean you're eligible. And the notice makes a concrete example for JVs with negligible activities in the EA. In that case, you're under the safe harbor of 100 million euro, et cetera, et cetera. But the Commission still says, be careful, because if you are above anything that's in 5D, so the market share analysis we just made, I might want to revert to a normal procedure. All the more if we are in one of those special circumstances, which we will discuss a bit better in the following slides. So flexibility clauses, this is another important addition of the notice. What are these? These are essentially clauses that give the Commission discretion to treat as simplified transactions which don't automatically meet the criteria we saw earlier. So again, this is quite nice for the parties, because it of course expands the possibilities of being able to use the simplified procedure. What hypotheses are these? Well, quite simply, for horizontal overlaps, we saw earlier the magic number is 20%. Here the Commission is saying if you are between 20 and 25, I might still consider you for simplified. Same thing for verticals. The magic number is 30%. It's saying if you are between 30 and 35, you might qualify for simplified. And vertical relationships, the new hypothesis is market share below 50% in one market and in the other below 10%. And there's also a nice addition for joint ventures, because there the magic number was 100, and here the Commission is saying if you are between 100 and 150, you may still qualify for simplified procedure. So, Philippe, I was wondering how you feel in terms of your undertaking that you notify a lot around the world, and if this goes a bit in the direction of obtaining, more cases under simplified procedure. If you see any difficulties in analysis here, what you thought about it?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me here. I think Matteo said it greatly before. It's much appreciated to have some additional flexibility clauses, and during the consultation period we asked as companies in several associations to have even more flexibility. And what we meant was that in addition to specific criterias, we would have appreciated having the possibility for the case team also to look more generally at transaction from a holistic perspective. So maybe you have something that is not precisely in each of these categories, but looking at the wider picture, you may perfectly realize that you are dealing with a transaction that will have no impact on the market. And Matteo mentioned a number of figures before, so the vast majority of transactions do not have any effect on competition on markets, and the European Commission is perfectly aware of this. So why not having more flexibility, meaning as discretion for the European Commission also to accept simplified filings in additional cases. And I think we will need inevitably to rely on what Matteo said before, on the attitude. We hope that there will be an open attitude by the European Commission to also have an interpretation of these criteria that allows an effective simplification. The figures you mentioned on what's the expectation of the European Commission makes us optimistic. But the first step we noticed, it was in your very first slide, somehow was not in that direction, because you mentioned that the new rules apply since 12th of September, and we are aware of cases where the pre-notification started before. So the parties submitted the Form CO prepared in the old form, and then the parties were asked to resubmit it in the new format. And this is not exactly the kind of simplification that we were expecting. So if the purpose is cutting the red tape, we are not exactly in the direction. Maybe it could have been managed with a better focus on the transitory period. And I think it's a pity, because as in-house counsels, I think we should be somehow the best friends of competition authorities in the companies, meaning that we are between the business and the enforcement, and often the business community struggles to understand many logics. So we know there is a rationale, so of course there is always the big question, but why do I need to notify this if it has no impact on the market? Okay, let's explain and so on. Because it's seen as just pure bureaucracy. And so, well, when you're asked to resubmit something you already submitted a couple of months before, only because the format has changed, we struggle a bit more, let's say. Not a good start, but I understand it's hopefully only for the transitory period.
Thank you. I wanted to add that all the criteria we just saw, the normal ones and the flexibility clauses, this can be absolutely mixed and matched, of course, by the parties. It means if you have transactions with more markets involved, your markets may just as well comply with certain criteria and other markets with other criteria. As long as they're all complying with the criteria, you would be under the simplified procedure. And on the flexibility clauses, I think it's also worth mentioning the Q&A of the Commission accompanying the package, because when questioned as to, well, when actually will you be applying the flexibility clauses, right? That's the main question, because parties are afraid that they will be treated differently, since this is not a strict rule, but it relies on the Commission's discretionality. So the Commission does say that these are cases which are above the normal thresholds, so it's more likely than not that they would not qualify for simplified treatment. So companies are alerted that this might be a nice concession, but not the rule. But then they also do add that if your case does fall under the flexibility clauses, and you do not fall under one of the safeguards that now we will see later, those circumstances, you are a very good candidate for simplified procedure. Of course, if you do have then one of the special circumstances, the ones that allow the Commission to sort of revert to normal procedure, then it will be a case-by-case assessment, and the Commission will take into account your arguments to decide. Then, moving on, right, we were mentioning the safeguards and exclusions. So this is a quite long list, in my personal opinion, of the circumstances where the Commission can actually revert to the normal procedure. So many of these were already there, and then you notice simply takes them over. In many cases, it maybe clarifies a little bit, adds examples. I think what's more interesting is to look at the new additions, which is also the reason why the notice has received some criticism in relation to these lists, because they are so long, and the perception is that this may undermine the overall objective of the simplified procedure in practice. So looking at a couple of these, just because it's interesting to see them more closely, there's one I think Philippe might be directly concerned with, which is market shares that exceed the metrics, the normal metrics in value and volume, where these could be important. So, of course, there are certain sectors where there's not only volume and value that may count, but, for example, production capacity, more or just as much. And so you have to be careful that your shares do not exceed those thresholds in those, with those metrics. There's also a lot of attention, and we see this a bit everywhere, on R&D, innovation, pipeline products, potential entrants. There's a number of, there was already a little bit there in the old notice, but you see this spelled out a lot better with the new list. There's also some, the final two are actually quite interesting. The one before the last does, I think, increment a bit the burden of analysis for in-house counsel and external counsel when you want to make quick analysis, because it asks you to look not at the direct vertical relationships, but at the entire value chain. So parties need to be careful to be looking at their overall activities, because if then you exceed the thresholds, you may be a good candidate for a normal procedure rather than a simplified one. And then the last one is also interesting, because there's an attention, a focus towards non-controlling shareholdings. So if one party has significant non-controlling shareholdings in companies which are active on the markets where another party is active, and this may be quite relevant for conglomerate companies, funds and so forth, which sort of as a policy or strategy do that, to have non-controlling shareholdings in multiple companies and in multiple markets. So this is the list. The other novelty, very important, that goes in the very pragmatic direction of simplification, I believe, is to create a really, really super fast track for certain transactions. Which transaction are these? These are the JVs with no activities whatsoever in the EEA, and transactions with no horizontal or non-horizontal overlaps. In these two cases, it's quite nice for the parties now because you essentially have to give very limited information, and the Commission essentially incentivizes companies to skip the pre-notification contacts. So pre-notification contacts are not mandatory, of course, but it's a good practice to, of course, have these to avoid incomplete notifications, to provide any clarification the Commission may need, etc., etc. In these two instances, the Commission now, with experience, has probably realized that these are really uncontentious transactions. So it just wants to know about them, that they exist, but really doesn't want to know much more. And so for these ones, there's a fast track, and the fast track also entails a faster decision. So instead of the 25 working days, the Commission will adopt this decision in around 16 working days. And we actually have a good example. We saw yesterday the first press release of the first decision under the super simplified procedure, and effectively it was adopted in 16 working days. But why 16? Because the member states need to have still the right within 15 working days to raise concerns if they wish to. So the Commission will wait for that and then adopt its decision. So I believe this is a quite nice addition, no?
If I may, it's, as you said, it's a possibility that was already there even before, but it's always great to see that somehow carved in a piece of legislation, even though soft law or whatever. And it's the reason why it's very much appreciated is that at the EU level we are always stuck when we are asked internally to prepare a timeline for the project, and you say, okay, how does it take to have the clearance? Well, there are 25 working days, blah, blah, plus pre-notification. And how much is that? Oh, I don't know. So the idea of having cases where you can be really somehow sure that it will have a fast track, meaning no pre-notification, and then even a shorter deadline is really much appreciated on the business side. And ideally, it would also have been appreciated, and it's something that we advocated for, to have a deadline for ordinary pre-notification phase. So, okay, it takes time, but at least let us know that it will end at a given date. This is unfortunately very important when we have to prepare deadlines and so on. Projects often very much change from a financial perspective just because of one additional day. And so this is something that companies attach great importance to. And if I may, another comment on the list that you had before on safeguards and exclusion. You also mentioned most of them were already there. Some are new. Some, as Matteo said, the devil is in the details, so let's see how they will be interpreted, some of them. And again, let's hope that there will be the good attitude, because otherwise we risk to jeopardize all the work that the Commission has done to simplify other aspects. So this is something that we fully understand why they are there, but I hope they will be really applied only in cases where the precise reason is triggered.
Yeah, perfectly agree. And moving to the last slide on the notice, which also then will speak back to what Philippe is saying on safeguards, but first let me tell you a little bit more about the form in general. We have a brand new short form CO. It's mandatory for the parties, no choice. You have to use this format. And this goes again in the direction of simplifying notification and review by the Commission. And how does it achieve it? By a tick the box format. So you have questions on jurisdiction and substance, which are in this format. There's also, of course, a possibility in certain sections for parties to then provide additional information if they really want to. But the idea is that you should try to, in your self-assessment, to be able to already answer in a yes or no matter. And what I believe is quite interesting in terms of what is now asked for jurisdiction in simplified cases is very simple. It's very simple now. And I say this with the experience of companies like Philippe's would work a lot with JVs and greenfield JVs, so where the issues of governance can be very complicated. I anticipated this earlier. And so finding out if effectively it's sole joint control or nothing can be quite articulate. And here instead the form is actually pushing you to making it very simple. And I think it's quite good in the sense that at a certain point you need to make a call. And there's also the clear intention of the Commission to wanting limited information on this. So for these kind of cases, they're so simple that I really don't need more information. I don't need more evidence, which is not certainly the case for the normal procedure. So there the Commission on jurisdiction will still want a full-fledged assessment and all the information it needs and all the evidence it needs. And I think the distinction is quite rational given the outcomes that the two different procedures can have, authorization versus prohibition commitments, et cetera, et cetera. So the Commission wants to make sure in the second case that jurisdiction is not contentious. On substance, also a lot of simplification. We have these tables and formats which everybody now needs to harmonize and align to. And depending on your transaction, why it's simplified, then you will be compiling different sections of the form. And it's interesting, again, for those two super simplified transactions we saw earlier, it's even more simple to compile it because you do not need to compile the section on the safeguards. And that's very nice because in those two cases, you really have the certainty that you do not have to go and make a complex analysis because it's quite straightforward that they will not have an impact in the EEA. While in the other cases, the idea is if you are able to reply to no to all those cases and so not fulfilling those safeguards, you should be quite on the safe side that your transaction will be treated as simplified. So this is a bit how the form looks now. Unless any comments, I will leave the floor to Riccardo, who will spend a couple of words on comparisons with what's happening around the world and the normal form CO.
Yeah, so thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we discussed so far that simplification was, is actually a much welcome effort by the European Commission. And with this slide, we just wanted to show that simplification is surely needed elsewhere. Because otherwise the benefits of having an expedite, fast review process in the EU are kind of taken away. And we just put on the slide a few, let's call them notable examples of mandatory pre-merger regimes worldwide, where the length of the phase one, which is often the only phase, is particularly long, and where it might not even be any fast or expedite review track at all. So for those of you who can read the slide, the number of days ranges from 60 to up to 105 business days, and of course the impact on the overall timing of the deal can be kind of devastating. So just a food for thought about the simplification that is needed also elsewhere. So we can move on to the next one. And we've seen the new short form CO, but among the aims of the simplification package, there was also the streamlining of non-simplified cases. And to achieve this, the simplification package provides a new long ordinary form CO, which has been simplified in different ways. The first one is, let's say in general, it has a clearer format. The indications of how to populate or fill in certain sections has been clarified. There are examples. There are format tables. There are the criteria to meet in order to request a waiver. Also, for certain information has been spelled out in more detail. A nice touch, so to say, by the Commission is for what we called on the slide as hybrid transactions, which are transactions that, if they are being notified under the ordinary procedure, do not meet the criteria for the simplified one. But in those transactions, there are certain markets that do meet those criteria. And for those markets, you're allowed to fill only what is now the new Section 7, which in a template format, which contains even less information. For instance, about the market shares of competitors, you only need to provide those for the last year and not for the last 3 years, which is surely less burdensome. And then let's say that the new Form CO changed more than reduced, and now we will see why, the level and the type of information that is required from the parties. And starting from the information that is no longer required, this is about cooperative agreements, which, let's face it, are not super common, at least not in all industries. So the impact of this change is arguably not very material. You no longer have to provide information about trade imports within member states or imports and export from outside. This, again, the impact of this change is probably not very great, because whenever you will discuss or deal with the geographic market definition in your Form CO, you will end up discussing these matters anyway. And then you do not have to list all the trade associations, but still you have to provide the content details of the main one. So a question to your client about trade associations is still there. Moving to what information is now included in the Form CO, which was not already there. Again, some of this, the list is long, but some of this information, again, is information that anyway you would have included in a Form CO. And for instance, you would have discussed probably support about public authorities. You would have discussed anyway, sooner or later, where else you are notifying that same transaction, so the list of other notifications. If a competitor had a significant uncontrolled shareholding in any of the parties, probably you would have said that. But what is really new is, for instance, the attention that has been touched upon before by Alice, is this attention to 3 main areas. The first one is data, which probably follow the attention of the Commission in general to recently to data-related theories of harm. I'm thinking about the Google Fitbit decision, which was mentioned yesterday in some of these. In one of these sessions. So now parties are required to indicate how they collect, store, and use data in a quite granular way. So this is in the Form CO, which it could trigger in the pre-notification phase, and maybe after the notification, a very detailed and on-point request for information by the Commission. I mean, you give the full picture, and they can tailor perhaps a request for information in a quite precise way. And then there's attention, as Alice was saying before, to research and development in general, to pipeline products. So you have to provide market share for those. And so there is also this addition to innovation, this attention to innovation. And again, I'm thinking about Dow DuPont and all the ink that was spent on that decision. And also about, the last point is about vertical integration. Attention to exclusivity, long-term contracts, and also, which is, we found it interesting, about service and repair networks. Based on our experience, the case law of the European level is little and quite old. So probably, but this is we were discussing this before this presentation, is our take. Also, even the Commission is willing, to study perhaps this area of vertical relationships. And being conscious of time, we can be very quickly on the last, let's say, leg of the simplification package, which was about the transmission of documents. Since COVID, which changed everything also insofar as notifications are concerned, we all started notifying electronically via eTrustex. Now eTrustex is the rule, and hand delivery is very, very exceptional. This is the one take. And the second take is that now documents have to be signed electronically as well, with qualified electronic signature, complying with a certain regulation, which is spelled out very little in the slide, but it's there. And on this, the only practical issue that we see is that not only us as in external counsel need to be prepared, to sign these documents, but that can be easy, but also clients need to do, because based on our experience, the only document that still had to be submitted by hand in Brussels was the POA, and now also the power of attorney. Now also that one has to be signed electronically. And while for European or mainly European clients, they may be familiar with this kind of procedure, we are still not entirely sure how non-European clients have this or are up to speed with this, especially because the requirements are laid down in European regulations. So this is our take on this, is that you really need to prepare in advance, even for formalities such as executing a POA. And I think we can. On the transmission of documents, this was more or less all, and this was more or less it.
Thank you, Riccardo. We were perfectly in our 45 minutes, but there's time for questions, of course, if anyone has, or comments, or...
Hello, Bert Willigens, economist at the Belgian Competition Authority. Maybe I want to comment or raise an issue with something we're facing, and it relates to the question that was raised. Can the rules be even a bit more flexible, and can the Commission have a bit more discretion to, in some situations when it seems logical, to apply simplified rules? What do they have to lose, basically? And in Belgium, we actually, a few years before the new draft, we actually changed our rules for horizontal mergers, that if the market shares are between 25 and 40%, that it is, that the authority has the discretion to say, okay, we're not going to go for full procedure, in the sense that we as an authority are no longer obliged to write and publish a full decision, and we can just say to the parties, okay, it's fine, we can stop the process here, green light, you can go on. Sounds great, and so the reason why this was done is that we had quite some mergers at the border, 25–30%, where we immediately made the assessment, okay, there seems to be no competition problem, but we still have to write this decision, meaning we have to properly investigate market definition and so on, because if we write this is a potential market definition, you create case law and you have to deal with this in the future. So that was the reasoning, and I just want to share some experience, and the Commission has not opened that door, and maybe, I cannot speak for the Commission, but something we're facing today is and it's the game, is that we receive these pre-notification forms where the markets are, the possible markets are defined, and then the default is basically except when it's very clear that market shares are high and that it will be non-simplified, like telecom and media and so on, but everything in between is like the default is, okay, this will be simplified. And the whole reasoning of what we're reading is like, look, you guys don't have to worry, you don't have to do much work. Market shares might be a bit above 25% or even a bit above 30%, but there will be no concerns. Okay, but what do? We investigate, because we say, yeah, look, but you're in this zone, but we only will clear if we are fully convinced there's no problem. And so there is a back and forth that's happening, and that's the game. So we ask critical questions, and so the information comes slower, and at some point, sometimes we say no, we're not at ease, we will continue, but then we have lost quite some time compared to before, and so that's sort of a trade-off that's playing. I think is if that happens, to my experience in the years that we're doing it, the whole procedure actually takes longer because you have this phase in between. While if we do clear, if we have asked these critical questions, then it's shorter because we don't have to do the writing of the decision or the investigation. So there's this maybe added dimension of insecurity and uncertainty, which is something lawyers have to deal with in communication to their client. It's like, okay, it can be simplified. It can be something in between, that we have some that we play the game to see whether they will take it forward or not, and it can be non-simplified. And then of course if we do non-simplified, it's like, oh, but we're already in the process so long, and then we ask a bulk of additional questions. So that's something I want to raise, and what that might explain the reasoning of the Commission to be quite formalistic and say, look, this discretion to simplify anyway, it might have some backlashes, and it's just something I wanted to share that might explain.
Oh, thank you. Indeed, no, very interesting. No, right now is how we read it and we understand it. It's really in those 25 working days that the Commission will have to decide if to revert to normal procedure. So it will be very quick, and that's probably why they have these strict criteria and not these gray zones, to avoid that kind of indecision that also companies and external lawyers don't want in terms of timing needs.
If I may, thank you for sharing. I was not aware of this flexibility possibility that you have in Belgium. And what I take from that is that, of course, it's a trade-off, meaning that then you can run in some additional questions and so on. And so my view is that it is up to companies to well prepare their requests. So not just saying, well, it's not 25, it's 26, but please, let's say it's like 25, but bring the case. And so I assume a well-motivated request with full support of data would allow a competition authority also to consider, of course, after their assessment, whether they can agree or not, and then of course if more information are needed, that's inevitable. But I think it's something that should be looked at as an example. Probably the Commission didn't believe it should follow it, but let's hope for the future. I have a dream that one day all these forms will be also the same and useful for FSR. So we have much to improve and simplify in the future, probably.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. I'm Johanna Welch from the Monopolies Commission in Germany, part of the Bundeskartellamt, more or less. You said in the beginning you're not so optimistic about the expected positive impact that the European Commission has estimated. And I assume that they probably looked at past cases, they applied all these thresholds that are now in the guidelines, and then they estimated how many cases would fall under it. And I understand the change as to simplify for both sides, also for the Commission. So I wondered whether you could explore a bit more why you're not so optimistic.
I think my current views are basically based on our experience in the past years, where we realized that the case teams at the Commission proved extremely bureaucratic in analyzing the draft notifications, the relevant markets, asking questions, and market data concerning all plausible markets in a pre-notification phase, which also in connection with cases which appear to us prima facie as non-problematic may last a number of weeks or a number of months. My concern regarding the implementation of this new simplification package, which again, for me, it is really a very welcome move, in theory. The Commission made a step forward here. Looking at the rules, there is room for more cases to be addressed, analyzed under the simplified procedure. Still, I'm afraid that if the DG Comp is not able to adopt an attitude in reviewing cases, in dealing with the pre-notification phases, which is fully consistent with the aim of the reform, I think we have made a very small step forward. So, and because all these rules, we have seen the rules which have been amended in a number of instances regarding the extent to which safeguards, exclusions may apply, and so on. All these issues are issues that will be dealt with in the pre-notification phase. And there, the Commission is not bound by any time limit. So it really, in my opinion, it really depends on how the Commission will be willing to deal with these issues.
If I may add to that, so my impression also is that for those two very super simplified categories that we saw before, the reform is fantastic, right? So there were plenty of notification for those that were really, we thought, well, what is there to look at? And so that's really beneficial. I think the issue now is all the rest, right? We're still on the umbrella of simplified. We are under the umbrella of simplified. So we should be talking about very simple cases that do not raise anti-competitive effects.
Concerning the two categories of unproblematic mergers that will deserve super simplified treatment, so very simple Form CO, tick the box, and no pre-notification phase, the risk that the Commission during the phase following formal notification might raise the issue of the applicability of safeguards or exclusions is very limited. Also because the super simplified form will not ask the merger parties wishing to follow the super simplified procedure to tick the box concerning the applicability or not of safeguards and exclusions.
And speaking to that, I think the issue is all the others, right? All the other transactions that could qualify for simplify, which are a little bit more complex. And there I feel that the analysis now is quite more burdensome for parties and for in-house counsel to make, because normally it wouldn't have been a full-fledged, right, antitrust analysis. Well, now if you look at that list, you really need to go in depth and have detailed discussions with your client of all the plausible markets and which value chain and minority shareholdings and which markets where. So in that sense, maybe an improvement that can be thought and food for thought for the future is to how to simplify this analysis, right, and maybe clarify a bit better when you do or do not fall in these circumstances, because that leaves really a lot of leeway to the Commission to call in transactions. If there's no more questions, I think we can close the session. Thank you very much.